Hello, this is Gary Rhinehart from Heart to Heart with Gary Rhinehart here at Dackland Radio Studios, officially now open. I'm here with Patrick Crouse of the Four Rivers Alliance of Hamilton County, part of the HFM Prevention Council. He is the coalition coordinator. How are you doing today?
Great, Gary, and thanks for having me in your lovely studio in downtown Lake Pleasant. It's great to be here finally.
Yeah, I wish it was a better looking day outside. It is raining hard out there.
It is.
Right now, and sometimes I joke with people, I'm like, we somehow moved to Seattle while I was sleeping because it just has not let up.
Yeah, everybody goes to Seattle, Gary. Like I said in Seinfeld, it's the pesto of cities.
Exactly. So, we are here today to talk about marijuana and its effects, and a little more specifically on its effects while driving. And I know this is kind of one of your areas of expertise. We've talked before, and you have many of them concerning opiates and things of that nature. So it's great to talk about something that's in the public view, especially in the legislature. I talked to Robert Smolin when he did his Q&A. Oh, it was probably 4 or 5 months ago he was doing this. And I had asked actually on the specific subject, and he was like, it's not if, but when New York will pass a recreational marijuana law. So,
right. Well, it seemed like it was a done deal in the view of some people that marijuana legalization, commercialization was going to be included in the New York State budget this year. And a lot of people organized and pushed back, and didn't come to pass. PTAs, law enforcement, medical groups all started raising a lot of points and asked the legislature to slow down a little bit and take a look at what's happened in other states and not rush this through. So it's still pending. There are bills in the New York State legislature right now. The current session is going to end in June. The sentiment seems to be that it won't happen this year. But there also does seem to be a sentiment, like you said, that is a matter case of when. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think as information gets out, a lot of people are going to take a look at what's being proposed in New York State and look at what's happened in other states and maybe come up with an alternative, because there is an alternative to full legalization, which is some kind of decriminalization or modification of the laws that exist now.
yeah. Well, from my perspective, and to be fully disclosure, I do support the legalization of marijuana for a couple of reasons. One of them would be safety control. If you were able to have a government body who could look after the marijuana and make sure that it's of quality, that's not going to hurt someone. Because if you go to somebody like a dealer of some sort, you don't exactly know what you're going to get. You don't know what's going to be in it, or you at least in a regulatory sense can get, you can control it, like an FDA type thing. You got to go through all the tests and say, okay, this is what you're getting. A few, that would be one of many, but I just wanted to put that out there, that's my view on it.
Right.
Not that I am going to be argumentative and disagree.
No, it's a point proponents raise, and it's a fair one. You're buying it on the street, you don't know what you're getting. But you go into a pot shop. Also, one of the things that's happened that has to be talked about first of all, one of the real first important points is that marijuana has changed a lot since, say, the 1970s, and it's in its natural state contains about 1 to 5% THC. THC is the main psychoactive substance that people use as the intoxicant or what gets you high. It's one of well over 100 substances, chemicals that are unique to the cannabis plant, including the main other one that we'll talk about, which is cannabidiol, which is CBD, and most people are probably familiar with that because anytime you open up your inbox, someone is trying to sell you a pill or an ointment or a tincture or a brownie or something with CBD in it, which does have medical use potential. But now THC in pot is way up there, 15 to 30% typically in stores. And we're not also talking about marijuana that you smoke. There's a lot of other ways to ingest, and this is increasing dramatically in the legal states. There's oils, there's waxes, there's crystals, and they go up to as high as 99% THC in some cases. So what are the health effects of this? It's unknown. We know there are definite health effects for smoking pot, loss of learning, the danger of drug driving. But what are the health effects of these substances that contain very, very high levels of THC, not only on kids but on adults? It's really unknown.
Yeah, and we kind of discussed this before we started recording about the classification that marijuana has at the federal level. You said that it was a Class 1.
Schedule 1.
Schedule 1.
Marijuana
Okay.
is in a classification along with other drugs like heroin that are considered to be very dangerous and that have no medicinal use really. And that's really not true of pot. We know there's of cannabis. We know there's medicine in there. Mm-hmm. We know CBD does have medicinal uses. The one FDA-approved medication, the Pedialex, which is used for childhood epilepsy, is based on CBD. So we know that, but again, a lot more research needs to be done. There's a lot of claims made about CBD products, and if you listen to people, a lot of people swear by having had good results for pain, anxiety, soreness, muscle soreness, and things like that. But again, it really hasn't been studied well. If you look at the medical literature on this from the AMA and all these groups, they say that a lot more needs to be done. The problem is that medical marijuana and recreational marijuana as an intoxicant are all mixed together now in people's minds, and that's a real problem.
As we were discussing, because it's in that classification, it makes it very difficult, if not almost impossible, to study properly the effects marijuana can have on an individual. It kind of leads itself to legend and conjecture from personal antidotes, or right. When you don't have the ability to study it in a lab in a controlled area with the scientific method and a controlled.
Well, remember too, this is a federal law. So one of the real conundrums and things that are going on, and it's in some ways very bizarre, is that we have 10 states and others on deck that have legalized while it's still federally an illegal substance. And it's kind of an untenable situation. The federal government really isn't enforcing this unless you're talking about moving from state to state. So in states that are illegal, like California, they are doing a lot of research on drug driving and the like, which is good. But that's a problem that really needs to be solved. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be removed from Schedule 1. There could be exceptions made for research, but I think that's an important topic to discuss, and I can't really answer that conclusively myself, but I mean it is a really good point, because we know there is a lot more research that needs to be done on it, both for potential, and we're talking about substances that are within it that could be extracted. I mean, if you go to get a medication, buy an aspirin, you don't go get the plant that came from the rainforest and smoke the plant. You take the aspirin. So FDA-approved medications, there's a lot of potential to derive them from cannabis, mm-hmm. but also a lot more research needs to be done to study the health effects. We know there's there's definitely proven a relationship between severe psychological disorders such as psychosis and depression if you become a regular user, if you become an addict. And there's a real potential. People say marijuana is not addictive. Well, again, the range is 10 to 30% of people will develop a substance use disorder for marijuana, which is classified in main psychological Bibles that list all the different, the substance use disorder is psychological disorder that can be treated. That includes marijuana as well. So it is addictive. Maybe not as much as other substances, but there's the potential there, especially regular use turning into addiction. And
I know many people have kind of tried to equate marijuana with alcohol as kind of the closest thing we laymen can use. And when you look at it that way, I mean, number one, is that a fair assessment if you were trying to look at it in terms of, like, I don't know if you would call it intoxication on the marijuana side.
Well, a lot of people say, marijuana is not as dangerous as alcohol. I'd rather have my kids smoke pot than drink. Okay, alcohol's been part of American culture since the beginning. At the time of the founding fathers, it was considered safer to drink beer or rum or whatever than water for good reasons. A lot of water was not safe to drink. So that's been part of our culture for a long time, as has tobacco. That doesn't mean you have to add a third substance and, normalize that as well. One of the reasons that you have close to 500,000 people dying from cigarette smoking is it's normalized, it's commercialized, big tobacco established itself, and now we've had a really great success in the past 20 years of reducing smoking rates. A real success. But what if we had nipped it in the bud? It was known back in the 30s that tobacco had addictive properties and was suppressed by the industry. So we're kind of at the beginning with marijuana. Think of it as a possible big tobacco, big pot, big marijuana as a huge industry, and it is a huge industry. That's what's really driving this is money. So just because other substances may be normalized and have health effects that we need to be concerned about, especially cigarette smoking, doesn't mean we need to add another one into the mix. We don't need to encourage it, normalize it, and that's really what we're talking about long term. Working in prevention, I think you want to think what's going to happen down the road 10 years from now, and that we wish we had done things differently.
Right.
We wish we had done that with the opioid crisis, with OxyContin and these other things. Developed a tremendous, 70,000 people dying a year from drug overdoses, including opiates. How could we have stopped that in the beginning by controlling the marketing of OxyContin?
Now, it's interesting you bring that up. As part of the medical marijuana process, and we touched on it briefly, there's an individual I know, I won't give names for obvious reasons, but who use it as a pain deterrent to get away from the opioids that can be very addictive, and they have said that it's helped them be able to control their pain better and help them be able to sleep better. And of course, it's like we said, it's regulated. It's a pill that you take that has the derivatives of marijuana in it, and it's it's controlled, it's looked after,
right?
So it's not like this individual is buying it off the street and then saying, "Oh, I feel much better." It's legally prescribed to them.
Right. Yeah, 20 plus states have medical marijuana programs, including New York State. New York State has a relatively good one. In New York State, you don't buy smokable marijuana. You buy a liquid, a THC liquid that are manufactured by companies, and it's designated for a dozen or so conditions. So there's a lot of evidence. Again, a lot of it is not based on a lot of research, but 20 plus states have medical marijuana programs, and they're increasing. Texas, for instance, had until recently allowed medical marijuana for one form of severe epilepsy, and now they're expanding that to a dozen or so, including cancer, HIV, AIDS, Crohn's disease. So medical marijuana is one thing. Again, when you're ingesting marijuana by itself, say you're smoking it, there's a lot of different substances in there. Which one is actually helping you? We're not, it's not really clear. If it's just THC, if it's CBD, it's one of the many other substances there. And I say this is totally not a professional or someone who's medically trained, but so we know there's medical properties in there. A lot of people say that it helps them, so we can accept that. But then there's a huge that's fine. But then why do you want to create a commercial marijuana industry for people to get high? It's a different thing. If you have a medical, and it's all mixed together now. People are THC and CBD, two totally different things, are all in people's minds. I think this is one of the problems with medical marijuana is people think of it now as a medicine and not an intoxicant. Well, different categories.
Right, and as you had mentioned, it's the difference between taking an aspirin and then using the plant the aspirin comes from, and using it for what could be what would you say, psychoactive properties. I actually do have a friend, another friend who very prominent in trying to legalize marijuana. He's from Michigan, which is one of the states that does have medical marijuana. He had very bad grand mal seizures, which are the seizures that most people commonly associate with a seizure, with the shaking and he started smoking marijuana. And then, of course, when Michigan legalized it, started taking it in that form. And it has been, I believe he said 3 years since he's had a seizure, to the point that Michigan now allows him to have a driver's license. They wouldn't let him before because of the fear he'd have a seizure in the middle of the road and cause an accident. And once again, this is not the marijuana you buy off the street. This is a controlled substance that is looked after by Michigan state law and formulated as such to help. I had talked to my therapist about using it for myself as someone who suffers from anxiety, depression, and PTSD. It's not easy to get a hold of. For me, I'd have to go all the way to Albany and then see a particular doctor who would see if those benefits would outweigh the cons of the medication I take right now.
Yeah, again, New York State has a pretty good program. It's supervised by a doctor. You have to have fit into certain categories of conditions and the like. And there's a lot of testimony by a lot of people that say it's worked for them. Again, the question I ask, and not being medically trained or anything, what is it in the marijuana that's actually being beneficial? Is it the CBD? That's been proven to be effective in treating epilepsy. So maybe we need to create and provide a medication like a Pedialex for adults that is derived from marijuana, but is actually an FDA-approved medication with the right dose and everything that you can really treat these illnesses. So it's like this huge industry has started where people are taking this, and there's some medical data to support it all, but it's all still very murky, and it's based on personal testimony, and we're not really sure what exactly in it that's helping the person. So I don't want to get bogged too down in medical, because so many states have programs and they seem to be working okay. But the thing is, when medical marijuana first started, and you can find quotes from people organizations like NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, who said, well, medical marijuana is just, a Trojan horse or a red herring. Our goal is to get recreational pot legalized, but we're going to get people used to medical first. And this was developed as a deliberate strategy. So I'm very suspicious, even to the point of thinking that this has all been really a grand strategy. And you see it in New York State too. The lobbying, the money that's being spent in the Capitol by medical marijuana firms, not only from New York State, but from California, all across the country. And they create front organizations and send lobbyists in. And it's a lot of money going into Albany on one side of the issue, and it's influencing policy. We need to look at what's happened in states like Colorado and California, and look at the data as far as the relationship between marijuana legalization and traffic fatalities, emergency room visits, kids ingesting edibles, THC gummy bears that are left around in the living room and ending up in the emergency room, the relationship between severe mental illness like psychosis and high THC levels. All these are really serious issues. Definitely rushing this through the state legislature isn't a good idea. And what's happened is that people, I think, a lot of legislators are looking at this now and are really trying to slow down a little bit and think about what happens if we establish really a big business, lots of money. And of course, the other side of it is the potential tax revenue. That's one of the main selling point,
Yeah, from a governmental standpoint, you see taxation revenue from California, from Colorado has been immense.
Well, it's been a lot less than they were projecting, a lot less. And they're projecting maybe something like $300 million a year in New York State, maybe more, depending on what level of taxation they're going to set. So you're looking at less than 1% of the New York State budget, like 0.2% coming from pot revenue. Well, what costs will go up? We know we're going to have to train a lot more police officers to become drug recognition experts. Very expensive. Hours and hours of training. We know we're going to have to do that. We know we're going to have to spend a lot more money, prevention and treatment. That's all going to come out of the taxation too. So Is it a net gain? What we've seen is some estimates in Colorado, for every dollar that you get from marijuana revenue, $4 to $5 an hour being allocated for treatment and law enforcement and health effects, et cetera, et cetera. So be careful of the claims about that there's some great benefit from taxation for this. And a lot of counties are opting out. Nassau County and Long Island has already announced they're going to opt out. The legislation in New York allows an opt-out course for localities to take. Of course, then you're going to lose any possible. I mean, it'd be worth looking at the resolution that Nassau County passed, and they raise all these points, and they've decided to opt out of retail. There's hundreds of localities in California that have opted out as well.
Now, going away from like the medical marijuana part, we go more towards recreational. Marijuana has been a drug that's been used for, I'd say, thousands of years from different cultures for different reasons. Of course, the more well known is Rastafarianism and their belief that it's a gateway to get to another level and be closer to, their God, which would be Jah. Many Mesopotamian societies had used marijuana in their own religious and sometimes even recreational uses. So it's been around for quite a long time. I think some people see it in that light and go, well, it's been around for so long, it can't be all that bad.
Well, yeah, and that same claim is made, for psilocybin mushrooms and peyote and all those other things. And but let's not get into that today. We'll tackle that.
Well, I did want to mention this one thing because I saw it on the news and it was interesting to me that Denver, Colorado, because we haven't talked about Colorado, has begun the process of legalizing mushrooms.
Yes.
I just thought to myself, like, that is a huge leap from one substance to another. And like we said, we won't get into it today. I'd like to get into it like another day, though. But I just saw it on the news, and I was like, okay, that's quite the jump. They go from the thing to the other like that.
Yeah, and again, this is illegal at the federal level. I'm not sure if it's psilocybin is Schedule 1 or 2. We'll go over that sometime. We'll have the data here, but yeah, it's a natural substance. It's been with us for thousands of years. So I mean, why should government get involved in this at all? Just let people decide. I think a lot of these cases you mentioned where these drugs are kind of put in the context of religion and culture, so they're meant to be something maybe used on special occasions, as part of a religious ritual and the like. What's happening with marijuana in the United States, it's just the normalization of it is an everyday thing that you take with your vitamins. If you go to California, Colorado, California too, not only being able to go to the pot shop and buy weed, you can buy candies and soft drinks, and crystals and dabs and oils with very, very high levels of THC. It's the health effects of this. Well, I said they're not really known. They are known to some extent. We know high THC levels in daily use are definitely linked to some severe mental, issues, psychosis and the like. A lot of this. And the thing is, as the curve is bent towards states more and more thinking it's not harmful, all this research is coming out is bending the curve in the other direction at the same time. As far as health effects, effect on the brain, we haven't even really touched at all. The teenage brain, which is a huge topic. Four Rivers Alliance is our interest is mainly prevention, working with youth, junior high, high school students. We know even a small marijuana with younger people, adolescents, joint or two, you can see changes in the brain that you can observe, So this is where addiction can begin. The younger you start with any substance, whether it's tobacco, alcohol, or pot, the more likely, the greater the chance of addiction. So we're really worried about the normalization of this in our culture. Of course, you can't buy it if you're 21, but will kids use it more if it's legalized? Colorado looks like it's stayed fairly flat, but first-time use is increasing. There's a lot to look at from these other states. So really what you're talking about, I think, is, again, marijuana now is not a natural substance. It's been bred, cultured to bring the THC levels up higher and higher and higher. So what you're consuming is, it's something different. And it's something that people are using daily more and more in a lot of different forms. The effects of this are really not known. So I think at the very least we want to slow down a lot. It's possible to address a lot of these other issues we haven't talked about, social justice, about racial disparities, and the like, and that is a real legitimate topic. But a lot of those problems can be solved on their own. You know, if you want to say expunge sentences, you want to decriminalize to maybe make the penalties for getting arrested for public use, say a civil penalty and not a misdemeanor, you can do that. There's a lot of things you can do to address these issues. Because there's no doubt that drug laws in the United States historically have been all tied in with racial prejudice and racial hysteria and a lot of things, and the disparity between crack and powdered cocaine, and we can go on a lot about this, but a lot of those issues can be solved without creating a big business with billboards and ads and buy one get one free and happy hours and THC gummy bears and pot tarts and all the rest that are coming down the road that exist in Colorado. Soft drinks, cannabis infused beers. There's huge investment right now between the multinational beverage companies like InBev and Constellation Brands and the Canadian marijuana companies. They're pouring millions of dollars into research to develop, and there are already some on smaller scale of cannabis-infused beverages. So again, it's kind of the normalization of everyday use.
Now, I've read articles and have seen videos of people who, like you said, have cultivated marijuana into many different things, whether it's the sativa, the indica, into almost I'm not going to say exact science, but it's a science, and a very interesting science, where someone will say, okay, this particular plant will help you calm down. This one will help you mellow out, it'll help you, and this is what you would use for depression or for anxiety and stuff. And then they'll say, well, this one you use is if you want to go do stuff, like if it's more of an like caffeine or coffee or things of that nature. If we were able to legalize it and have stores where people had to go to classes and were able to say, like, as I was a customer, I'm looking for this. I'm looking for something to help me bring me down. I'm a first-time user, or this would be my first time, or I'm a very light user. And they would be able to go, okay, this is what you're going to want. To me, I feel like you try to equate that to, like, I've never drank alcohol before, and someone's like, let's do tequila shots. You don't do that, because then it's going to end badly. Maybe they'll say, okay, have a beer, which is softer. It's not going to harm you as quickly. Do you think that would be a good approach, to have people who were trained in this to be able to say, listen, here's what you're going to want. You're not going to want to go to the hard stuff, because that's for people who have done it for a while or who are used to it. I remember there was a New York Times article of a woman who had taken edibles, and she had listed what had happened in her hotel room. The mental effects of, like, she couldn't walk, she just wanted to get out of the room, but she couldn't. And many people have said, well, the problem with that is she took something too strong without building up the tolerance to it.
Well, we're already there. It's already getting very, very sophisticated in the markets. Manufacturers companies, small and large, are already doing this, making substances that are very targeted to the consumer. So you want to get maybe 1% THC and 5% CBD. I mean, there are things like that. For you want to be mellow, you want to get blasted, you want this, you want that. That's already happened. If people are interested, what I read a lot is, it's great to read the government, to read the National Institute on Drug Abuse and DEA and all the places what their studies are saying, the AMA and everything. But what's real interesting is to go right to the marijuana industry and I read several newsletters, and it's just fascinating, because they are really at the cutting edge, because they're in the business. Leafly, Marijuana Biz Daily, all these outfits that are involved. Leafly's particularly good. That's really where you can almost get take a college course on this stuff and be aware that these are people who are pro and are making money off of it, so they have their biases. But it's really to see what's at the cutting edge of the industry, what's available in the legal states. That's where we're headed. It's definitely where we're already headed, and I think consumers, as they learn of pot, get more sophisticated. That doesn't really change all the other issues that we've raised. And people will, do have the ability to look at this. I mean, people aren't stupid. They can look at this and say, I made mistakes in the past. I want this effect. I want that effect, and that's already happening. But as far as edibles, the danger of edibles is that, of course, as you ingest something, it gets in your system a lot more slowly. So what happens is, say you have a candy bar, like a Hershey bar has all these little different pieces. If you read the serving suggestions, it might have 5 milligrams of THC in each little square. And someone has one, and they're only supposed to eat that, and they eat it, and 5 minutes, 10 minutes go by, and nothing happens, and then they eat another one, and et cetera. And before they know it, they've ingested this huge amount of THC, and it hits them half an hour later, and then they're in there for kind of a rough ride.
Right.
So that's a real danger with edibles, and of course in New York State, the legislation includes all these, marijuana is defined as concentrates, extracts, all that's wide open. If legalization does happen, you talk about people in the legislature saying it's a done deal. There's still a lot of chance to really influence what happens. We could ban concentrates, we could ban waxes and oils and crystal, 99% THC stuff. There's still a lot we could do. We can do a lot with education and drug driving and prevention and everything. So that's a separate topic. But at this point, what you're talking about is already part of the industry. I mean, the one thing I mentioned, there's a rule that's called the 80-20 rule, which is that 20% of the population, so this is in the alcohol booze industry, provides 80% of the revenue. In other words, it's the heavy users that are the people that really you're making your money from, and that rule is followed in Colorado and in other states. The conclusion I kind of come to as I think about that is that it's the daily users, the people who it's the people who drink every day that are really making the profits for the alcohol industry. So that's kind of a sobering thing to think about. It's the same thing with marijuana. It's the people who are going to develop an addiction. I read an article on Willie Nelson the other day in Rolling Stone about how he how marijuana saved his life. He got him off of drinking and smoking. Okay, well, now he gets up in the morning. First thing he does, he gets out his vape pen and has a hit and goes in the daily. So he's probably an addict and say, well, it hasn't really hurt him. Well, he's up there in years, but what if this is a 15, 16-year-old kid who starts using daily? That's really that's what we're really, and will it get to kids more easily as it becomes normalized and legalized? I think the long-term trend is and definitely young adults. People heard that 21 to 25 group are using more because of legalization. So I mean, the point is that as I think about the taxation issue, I mean, really, most of the tax revenue is going to come from, if you follow that 80-20 rule or something like that, most tax revenue is going to come from heavy users. And they may be using a particular blend that they like or whatever, but it's just something about it that I think sometimes that the state lottery systems are often a taxation that hits the poor or the low income the most, and it strikes me that legalizing drugs is the same thing. Yeah. So again, there's other ways we could go in New York State. We could have a decriminalization policy that would address drug driving, because there's really no way to test for marijuana intoxication. Just the metabolism of marijuana is very different than alcohol. It's very different to prove a correlation between impairment and use. Really hard to prove in court, hard to test. There's no breathalyzer. You have to depend on roadside tests and a blood test, a combination of both. So there's another way to go in New York State other than full legalization, and we're pretty much advocating just people that they slow down and look at what's happening in other states. Really take some time. There's no rush on this, and a lot of the other issues that are brought up, especially sentencing disparities and things like that, those all could be addressed separately.
Your big point is to just take our time and kind of figure out the long-term effects of what it is, what smoking marijuana would do, or edibles, or however you consume it.
Right.
I know with like alcohol and cigarettes, it's always been a big thing that you keep it out of the hands of children, and of course children are sneaky and adults don't listen very well, no matter how many times you tell them not to give it to the young kids. But yeah, it does affect them in that manner. And if it's okay with you, I have a video about what people think about driving high.
Okay.
This is brought by the Hound Foundation.
Hound's a California company that's actually one of the companies that's trying to develop a marijuana breathalyzer, and they're really, they're really in this kind of race. Some people call it a race because they think if one's developed that will help in the whole policy area. And they're actually a really good resource as far as providing really good information on marijuana, health effects, and drug driving. So,
all right, so let's listen to this video here.
Driving under the influence of anything is dangerous.
It can definitely impact your driving, but only, depending on how much you smoke.
It's kind of like the idea of like driving buzzed, like smoking a little versus driving buzzed. Where do you draw that line? It becomes very hazy.
I don't know that there's that much stigma driving high, where there is driving drunk. And so a lot of people aren't super educated about that, and so they don't know. And so there's not as great like a fear factor.
I have been in that situation before where everyone in the car was stoned, and unfortunately I did not do anything to prevent that from happening.
I feel like driving impaired in any way is dangerous.
And it puts not only yourself or your passengers, but other people who are driving at risk also.
It's something that you should definitely think twice about, because driving is dangerous enough when you're sober.
The cognitive impacts are real, and to downplay them or ignore them is just reckless.
Because you're in a vehicle that's basically a missile going 60 miles an hour, so any small error can really just make enough of an impact to kill people.
If people are at the very least aware of that, that's a step in the right direction.
If somebody who was about to operate on me or was about to fly me on a plane was high, I wouldn't let them operate on me or fly me on a plane, because honestly, I don't want any mind-altering effects to be on the person who is taking my life in their hands. And so, wow, I see the point now. Okay.
Alright, and then at that point, I know our listeners can't hear it, says, is it worth the risk? And then, of course, there's the Hound Foundation logo. You can find them on YouTube. That's where I got this particular video. And yeah, it brings up a good point, and one that I think we both can agree on is anytime you drive impaired, whether it's alcohol, marijuana, prescription medications, or anything in between, it is never a good idea.
Definitely not. No, I mean marijuana definitely affects your reaction times, all those different things. It's not, and the statistics of people in Colorado who have driven while high or drive often while high is really frightening. I don't have the numbers exactly in my mind, but it's one of those many things you can look at in states like Washington State or Colorado that have legalized people who say they are. The number of college students who said they've driven after smoking pot and stuff is really high against percentages. So that's really a scary thing. It shows that people perceive it to be different than alcohol, and it's an intoxicant that has its own particular, side effects or effects as far as your motor skills and everything. So we know it's not safe, and we know there have been some recent accidents involving fatalities, high-profile ones where people have been tested positive for THC. There was one in Massachusetts. Someone was driving home from a dispensary for medical marijuana. They had, a card to get medical marijuana, probably had it ingested on the way home, and and driving 80 miles an hour and hit and killed a Massachusetts trooper. Again, is he going to be prosecuted for this? It's very hard because regular users, THC stays in your system. It's fat soluble. It's not alcohol is in and it goes out at a steady line. But THC will stay in your system, so you can be tested positive and it doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove you're impaired. That's one of the real dangers about this, and that's being kind of swept under the rug. I'll mention another thing about the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act in New York State. New York State, like most states, when you get a driver's license, there's something called the informed consent law. So if you're out driving, you are consenting to have a test done on you, breathalyzer, saliva, blood, at the request or direction of an officer. So that's informed consent. If you refuse, then there's severe penalties. The New York State legislation removes marijuana from the list of drugs that are in the informed consent laws. And I asked myself, why is that happening? Why would the sponsors of this do this? And that just takes away a huge tool from, it's like saying, okay, the informed consent law, we're going to remove alcohol from it now, so you no longer have to have a breathalyzer if you're pulled over. That's now not part of the, that's an exception to the law. That does this with THC and cannabis. So why? And I think it's because I've asked the sponsored legislation to answer this, and they haven't responded. Maybe it's in there as a bargaining chip that they'll eventually take it out. Probably it's hard to see it passing through legislature within that. But I think one of the reasons is because there's no real correlation between you can be very high and have a high level of active THC in your body and not be impaired, or you can have a very low level. It all depends on the person. It's very different than alcohol. You can have a low level and be impaired and drive over and kill somebody because you didn't see them because you were stoned. So it's a really huge topic, and it hasn't really been debated very well. We really haven't looked at what's happened in other states. One reason that it didn't get through the budget process was because a lot of groups came forward and including law enforcement saying, this is a huge issue. We don't have a breathalyzer for it. We don't have, it's very difficult to prove impairment. It's, so.
Yeah, and they have lawyers, and you can see them on TV, who specialize in taking the different tests you can do and scrutinizing them to the point that you make them almost obsolete, like the touch your nose or the ABCs to see if you're slurring, or even sometimes the breathalyzer. They'll try and scrutinize to the point, did the officer do it exactly the way they were supposed to do it? And that makes it even more difficult to prosecute people, especially when you mention if you take away being able to take the more hardened tests, the blood tests, the breathalyzer that some people are trying to come out with.
Well, and drugs have all different effects depending if it's marijuana, it's cocaine, or whatever. You can be pulled over and an officer can think you're impaired and think it's not alcohol, depending on whether your eyes are dilated or constricted. As a whole, so you really have to be trained as a drug recognition expert. So usually, if you're pulled over, usually what happens in other states, including here, is that they will call a DRE to the location, have them give a series of tests, and really narrow down what they think that the substance is, and then they'll say, "I believe that you're impaired," and then you have to get them to a lab to have a blood drawn to prove what it is. With pot, THC, you got to do it pretty quickly because the level drops down pretty fast. Say someone's been smoking like the last couple hours, it'll peak and then it'll come down fairly quickly. That again is another. So there's the expense, the time involved in this. To be trained in a drug rec, to be a DRE, I mean, it's well over 70 hours of training. Expensive. That'll have to be done in New York State. Legalization happens because that's real essential to prove any proof of impairment. One of those costs that will increase. So it's marijuana again is unique as far as its metabolism, and it poses real challenges to traffic safety.
Now, my question is, when does personal accountability come into play with this? I mean, if I go out and I drink 4 or 5 shots, then go driving. It's on me. It's a personal responsibility that I just went out and I'm doing something really dumb. Same thing could be said if I smoked a joint or bong rip or whatever. There needs to be a personal responsibility that says, listen, I just did this mind-altering drug, whether it's alcohol or marijuana, I shouldn't be driving.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no matter whether it's legal or not legal, I mean, personal responsibility is huge. But we know policy makes a big difference. I mean, look what's happened with tobacco. A combination of taxation, regulation, just general social norms that now, I mean, kids think, where it used to be cool to smoke, they don't think that anymore. They do think it's cool to use an e-cigarette like a Juul, and now we have a huge epidemic of people using electronic nicotine delivery devices among kids. That's a huge problem, and it's related to marijuana, which we probably won't get into today. But so policy can really make a difference, and has with tobacco. I mean, we can decrease use a huge amount. Same thing with alcohol. I mean, the DWI laws, just education in schools, everything have really helped a lot with fatalities. But of course, it's still an issue. But that's helped again. So we're kind of with marijuana and other drugs. We're at the beginning. So what are we gonna do? We can't just say, oh, it's a natural substance, let's legalize it, because the perception of it is, unfortunately, that it's not harmful, that it is a medicine. And again, with the high THC levels and the normalization of it through culture, through advertising, through big business, there's a real danger there that it'll bend that curve of where personal responsibility and everything is still important. I mean, the data, the statistics aren't good from legal states about the number of people who drive while high. It's really bad, and so we gotta study those states and think about that here. I'm talking about New York State. I mean, the issues about federal policy, federal laws is important, but we're looking at here now in New York State and of course New Jersey and Vermont, and it's tough because we're surrounded, and if you follow the news, it's everything's moving in one direction. Doesn't mean New York State has to jump on the train.
Now, I'd like to take a quick detour from what we're doing and talk about the prevention aspect, because that is what you do. Is you get a coalition, a bunch of different views, different people with different backgrounds together for prevention. And I know when a lot of people think of drug prevention, they think of how do I describe it? Like the silly stuff. If you ever you've probably watched the movie, or at least heard of Reefer Madness, which was the 1930, 1940 scare tactic film about marijuana, where they took it to an extreme that many people now find kind of hilarious, about how many people feel misinformed about that. Is it important that you make sure that you get the facts right?
Yeah.
And statistics and things like that.
We've learned a lot. You can remember the ads like, this is your brain on drugs, and they crack the egg into the frying pan and things like that.
Yeah.
And there's so much I think prevention, we've learned a lot over the last few decades about what does and doesn't work. And especially for teenagers, I mean, they're smart. They can not only what doesn't work, but what can actually make things worse. We've learned a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
In prevention, one of the first things we try and do, and we do here in Hamilton County a lot, is try to assess what the problems are, what are the trends. So we've seen here really good results, mirroring national trends as far as tobacco use, cigarette use, really good. Reductions in underage drinking, though it's still an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Marijuana in all grades up here, not every grade, but in general, on average, slightly increasing use. We've done assessment in Hamilton County over the past 7 years that Four Rivers has been active, so we see slightly increasing use of marijuana, and we see a decrease in perception of harm, and that mirrors, again, national trends. So the first thing, and we've also seen very high rates of e-cigarette use, and in seniors in Hamilton County, it's close to 50% have used e-cigarettes vaping, etc. in the past 3 years. That doesn't mean they're doing it every day, but they've at least tried it, and they've tried something, nicotine, which is very addictive. So again, following national trends, real problem. So what we do is then look at these substance abuse issues and then try and develop evidence-based programs to reach kids. A lot of it is just informational. This is how your brain works. This is what these substances do. This is what can happen. This is what addiction is about. So, and also address the question of perception of harm, but also policy. Where are people getting things? Is it rare you walk into the convenience store and are e-cigarettes and pods and the flavors all being marketed right there on the counter next to the candy? There's tons of things you can do as far as policy about changing things, about changing laws. We're in the midst of a shift from tobacco 18 to 21. That's policy changes. So we've learned a lot, and there's a lot of things that we know don't work. But emphasizing, I think, the positive, not so much that, this percentage of kids drink, these percentage of kids don't drink, these percentage of kids don't smoke pot. Emphasize that you don't have to be part of that, that in crowd. So we really try and emphasize those kind of normative campaigns that emphasize the positive things that have happened, trying to get kids facts. You're right, absolutely. And also address what are a lot of what we call the risk and protective factors. A lot of things as far as risk factors are family conflict. We know that. We know the links between substance abuse are often rooted in family conflict, how kids perceive their communities, economic, all this stuff about the community you live in. So we try to address all those. Look at it in our research. We look at what are risk factors that are higher than normal, and then we look at protective factors. Of course, there are a lot of protective factors. It's all logical stuff. Good family life, doing well in school, regarding your community positively, have a high, your friends, have a high rate of disapproval for substance use. All those things are good. We want to try and boost those protective factors and look at the risk factors that are of concern and try and target those with evidence-based programs that slowly, make a change. And it's worked. Prevention really, it's a lot easier to get somebody into recovery who has developed a substance use disorder and help them to get better and say, okay, we have data now. We have these people who have gone through, are in recovery. It's harder in prevention because if you prevent somebody from using something, it's a little harder to document that unless you do assessment and look at trends over longer periods of time. And what we see is organizations like the Fort River Alliance that are sponsored by the Drug Free Community Support Program have had really, really good success, especially when you can measure use and trends over periods of 5 to 10 years.
I always think it's an important thing to talk to teens as adults, trying to use, as we had mentioned in the beginning, the more hokier stuff and even scare tactics. I feel to them it makes them feel inferior instead of just saying, listen, I'm going to talk to you as an adult. I'm going to talk to you straight, and here are the facts.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important thing, rather than talking down to them with the egg thing or
right.
Things of that nature.
Well, we could talk, maybe that'd be another topic for another day, is to talk about this animal called the teenager, because
We've all been
because it's a huge topic, and I'm certainly no expert, and we do have experts, including in the Adirondacks. We have Mr. Michael Nierny, who lives in Long Lake, who's an internationally known expert on substance use and the teenage brain. We know that the kids, adolescents, the brain is developing from like 13 to 25. Period of rapid change and growth in different areas. And one of the things it does is make kids do really impulsive, risk-taking behavior. So one of the things in prevention we try and do is channel kids into risk-taking that's safer than getting drunk and then going out swimming or in a motorboat at night or something, like that.
Doing something stupid.
Which is a great cause of fatalities for youth, especially for males. But that's a huge topic, is understanding how the teen brain works and why there are such high levels of substance use. It's an issue of depression and kids self-medicating. So that's a huge issue. I'm getting a little bit off on a tangent, but that's something we could talk about some other time. But
yeah.
So you're right. I mean, teenagers are obviously making the transition to becoming adults. They need independence. They need to take risks. They're going to make mistakes, and hopefully you get them through there. I mean, with that period. I mean, we try and urge people, as far as alcohol use is just to hold off until, it's not that only that it's illegal, but if you can hold off until you're 21 at least to start drinking, the odds that you're going to develop an addiction the data is there, is a lot less. The younger you start, doesn't matter if it's cigarettes or beer or whatever, the greater your chance that you're going to develop an addiction. We know with smoking, it's so many people who developed, cigarette habits started when they were, 13, 14, 15. I mean, I know the data's there on all this. So much of it is trying to, really, I mean, that's the main thing, is trying to prevent addiction. There's going to be use, but we want to try and knock the rates down. We want to try and be proactive. I mean, so many of these things have happened. The Juul and e-cigarette epidemic came out of nowhere because people didn't realize that teenagers live in this whole other culture called social media, and that's where this is all happening. You don't need to advertise on a billboard with a Marlboro Man. There's another universe there, and I think parents were a little bit clueless, and these things take off, and all of a sudden it's an epidemic. Same thing happened with prescription opioid abuse. It took off for a lot of reasons, and we can talk about that some other time. It's a lot easier to try and prevent stuff than to try and deal with it, with an epidemic starting where
and the
half the teenagers are ingesting nicotine through electronic devices, or we have 70,000 people dying from drug overdoses.
Yeah, we'll try to rein this back to our original point, which was the marijuana and smoking. You do see a lot of celebrities are out there,
sure,
and they are pushing it forward, whether it's from my generation of the early 90s. You had a lot of the West Coast rappers. Snoop Dogg, of course, is a huge pusher of legalization. Ice Cube is another big one.
Willie Nelson
from
my
your
generation, the generation before.
Even from your generation, and I'm trying not to date you unfairly, but Carlos Santana has always been a big proponent. And then even today, you look at a lot of celebrities such as Seth Rogen is a huge proponent of trying to legalize marijuana. James Franco, even a lot of artists today are big pushes,
right,
and kids look up to these
sure,
people.
Same thing goes with vaping. I mean, you go to any the Oscars, and Leonardo DiCaprio's there, hitting on his Juul right there at the table, and it's definitely that's a huge influence on kids. But people who are proponents, I mean, what are they, they say they're concerned about people being in jail for it. Okay, deal with that issue. Do they think it's really is a medicinal substance that's good for you that you should ingest every day? You got to be pretty careful about that, because we know that regular use decreases learning. We know it does all kinds of things. There's things that they suspect that are just starting to study that possibly can be passed on down through epigenetics is a huge topic that actually can be passed on from generation to generation if you use drugs like marijuana. And we don't even we're just starting to look at this. So I would say there's a real chance now, because marijuana is kind of is a counterculture thing, pretty much. It has been.
It always
we want it to be part of American culture in the way the alcohol and tobacco are, and then 5 to 10 years down the road, engage in this really expensive campaign to start to push back and to undo what we've done. That's what we're really, I think, talking about. So, I mean, I would say people live in New York State, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Jersey, all these states really should look at what's happening in the other states. Health studies that are coming out now, just at the time that it seems like it's a tsunami that you can't really do anything about.
Yeah. Now, what would you say to people who are like, it's my body, my choice. If I want to use this substance recreationally, why should I not be able to? And not even talking about the doing it and driving part, but like I'm in my house,
Right.
I want to smoke marijuana. I don't feel that somebody should tell me that I shouldn't be able to.
Yeah, well, I guess I agree with that to a point, like with just about anything, but the fact is none of us exist in this live on this island by ourselves. We live in a society, we have families, we have kids, we live in communities, so any action you take, I mean, just on a practical level, say you're doing edibles and you leave them around and the kid gets them. Your kids see you doing it, what does that tell them? And then you talk to them, you try and educate them, saying, well, it's something only adults do, whatever. But none of us exist in this little vacuum by ourselves, and okay, so where are you going to buy it? Then is there going to be a store down at Charlie John's, and is there going to be then what's going to happen, are there going to be billboards up so you can have, if you're just growing it in your basement and, that's one thing. Are your personal choices then part of this huge change in the culture where you develop a very, very lucrative, multi-billion-dollar industry that you're a part of in your own little way while you make your decisions, and you're part of that, None of us exists in this little island. You're part of a changing culture, and you're part of a very, very big business, which is launching itself, into the stock market and all the rest. And what's that going to mean down the road? What's it going to mean for kids as they're growing up and as things become normalized? And we know it's not a harmless drug. People will disagree on that, but we know it's not at all like it was in the 70s. It's a different animal, and it's really about it's not a religious thing that you do once in a while. That it's something that is something you use daily. A lot of people use it daily, and I read these like comment streams in the New York Times, wherever. There's an article recently about people using marijuana before they work out or after they work out and everything, and it wasn't a very scientifically, it was based on a lot of polls and stuff. So then you read the comment streams, and a lot of comments. Yeah, I use it and I feel better after I work out, or it makes my bicycle ride better. I don't know. I mean, do you really? People are different if that's what you want to do. But then you're part of a big change in culture where there are a lot of negative effects that are part of your supposedly good experience that other people are going to suffer. And there's a lot of things we just don't know, about the health. It really hasn't been studied, as we know. We know that there's medicinal potential in it. How do you extract that and make that into medications that are appropriate and dose controlled and all the rest? But it's a really, to me, it's a real fascinating thing that we're seeing this wave of legalization. There's so much evidence that's coming along with it that is showing that there are a lot of negative effects.
Do you think if it did become legalized recreationally, there would be a way to limit certain elements of, like you just said with the medical part, but try to limit it? Like, if you're drinking alcohol, you can only go up to a certain proof before, it starts getting dangerous.
Right.
Do you think they'd be able to do the same thing where
Sure.
it's like you can do this level of THC or this level of CBC or CBD, sorry. This is the level that you can go no farther.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. You already see that with alcohol. There's certain levels you can't go over, etc. That's one of the lessons that we learned from Colorado. Colorado legalized through a citizens' referendum. New York State, well, we probably won't be the first, but we'll be one of the first that will happen through the legislative process. Right now, there's nothing in the legislation even addressing that. It leaves it wide open because it legalizes concentrates and extracts, which are very, very high THC. So then it creates a marijuana control board or some kind of administrative agency in Albany that will then do it. So there'll be a lot of chance to continue to be involved in the process that we could ban concentrates and things. We could have limits on THC and all the rest, for sure. But it's harder when it's not done in the legislation.
Okay.
So, but that's a good question. There's a lot of things that could be done. I mean, in Vermont, it's legal to possess and to grow, but they haven't created a retail business yet. It's still not legal to sell it. And it's in the legislature. I think one house passed it, one didn't. I forget which one. I think in the Senate they said no. So people are saying, well, we can possess it, but we have to drive to Massachusetts. Well, why don't we just legalize it here? So, that's what happens. There's definitely a lot of ways people who are concerned about this can stay. There's a lot that we can do on advertising, for instance. The restrictions now in New York State legislation are kind of a couple hundred feet. You can have a pot shop in, say, Charlie John's Annex right now. Again, local governments will be involved, et cetera. But there's a lot we could do to address drug driving, to increase the amount of money we're spending on prevention and treatment. We can control THC levels. We could put a very strict limit on dispensaries where they are, how many they can be, other things that don't come by advertising. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that could be done to influence what it looks like if it does happen. So I think people will stay involved in the process, but I think we've had a pretty good success in slowing things down here because it was really being rushed through, and it's a huge issue. Again, from a prevention standpoint, it's a lot easier to slow things down and really address all these issues and look at them now than find yourself taking on companies like Philip Morris and all the rest that you had to fight back against over the past 30-40 years. And all these guys lining up in front of the Senate and being asked, is tobacco addictive substance? No, and they all say it, and everybody knows it's extremely addictive. So are we down the road 10, 20, 30 years from now finding out all these things that research was showing are possible areas of concern, or definitely areas of concern, like the relationship between marijuana use and mental illness that increases anxiety, increases depression, increases psychosis with regular use, and then having to try and deal with the wreckage of all this.
Now, what would you say to the one major argument I've heard across the board? I've heard it on television, I've heard it from friends and family who've done it. It's something you hear all the time, is that marijuana has never killed anybody.
Well, yeah, you can't overdose on it like you can with heroin or, the like. But the use of it has resulted in deaths. If you go into a psychotic episode because you are so wasted on ingesting shatter, which is like green crack at 99% THC, and you kill somebody, or you drive and kill somebody, or you commit suicide, those have all happened in Colorado. Definitely. Okay, so there's a fatality resulting from drug abuse.
Do you think they get away from it because you could say it's more of a byproduct of using marijuana rather than a direct... Like, if you drank too much alcohol, you get alcohol poisoning, you die.
Right.
Where in marijuana, like you said, you don't overdose unnecessarily, but it is a byproduct of, or a part of why this event happened.
Yeah.
But people are like, well, since it wasn't a direct cause, we can say zero.
Well, I guess I would compare that to alcohol. How many people die directly from alcohol poisoning, which would be the equivalent of an overdose? Not very many. I don't know what the statistics are. It happens. You have to really, someone who's in a frat hazing incident or something and dies of that's the equivalent of an overdose. But how many people die because they get intoxicated and you're 18 years old and you decide to swim out to this island or get in a motorboat or whatever? So you're dying of the consequence of it. I mean, the statistics from alcohol are much, much worse than pot. We know that. You know that. I don't have the exact statistics right now. But again, what fatalities resulting from use? Neglecting. What if a child is neglected and is forgotten in someone's car? And suffocates or dies of
like heat stroke.
Yeah, heat stroke, etc. What if someone has a psychotic episode and commits a homicide or commits suicide or jumps out a window? All these side effects from use, and that's not, obviously most of the people who are using marijuana are not. That's not happening. It's not like methamphetamine. Most people probably using it are not engaging in activities where, unless they're driving, are probably not going to result in any kind of harm, other than maybe just decreasing their general intelligence and learning and the rest, But again, I think definitely the statistics of the number of people who we know in Colorado and other legal states have said they drive while high or have is really, really high, because people think that it's okay. It doesn't have the stigma of alcohol, and so really there's a lot of, we need to educate a lot, but the idea that no one has actually died from it, I think is definitely false. You really can't overdose from it, but you can cause accidents, you can harm yourself, you can harm others. It's not a huge number, but it's something to be concerned about. I think definitely in New York State, if there's legalization, increased use, I think you'll see. We've already seen some. We've already seen fatalities. And again, that's in the person's system. Did it cause a fatality, or was it something else? It's really hard to prove that one.
Okay, well, let's try and wrap this up.
Sure.
I'll let you have the final word.
Okay. Well, we talked a lot about marijuana today, and I think I'm taking a moderate. This isn't reefer madness. I think what we've seen is a curve, like I've said, in the states generally. Their perception, both with medical and recreational marijuana, the curve has gone in one direction, that it's not. We're definitely decriminalizing. Okay, but we're finding at the same time that that's happening, the curve is going the other direction, about more and more studies coming out about the dangers of marijuana as a drug. Especially the high THC levels that are normal today. Very high levels in certainly in extracts and oils and waxes, and we haven't got into talking about how those are manufactured, but maybe some other time we can. So this is happening. So things are moving in one direction as far as what we're learning. We know that perception of harm for kids is going down. We've got data on that here in Hamilton County. We know use is going up slowly. So from a prevention perspective, we feel like now is the time to definitely slow down with this and find out, take into account all the issues that people raise, social justice, all the rest, and say, okay, what's the best policy that we can come up with, and look at what's happened in other states. So I think in New York State we should slow down and look at this for 5 or 10 years, at least, not try and rush it through. That might not happen. It might, in my view, it probably will. I won't say probably. It may happen next year, but. I don't know, we've had a lot of people pushing back on this. Groups, like I said, law enforcement, parents, schools, medical community, all across the board really saying this. So we're kind of taking, for me, in the Four Rivers, we're taking, I think, which is a pretty moderate approach, which is, we could make some changes in the laws. We could decriminalize in certain areas, decrease penalties, do a lot more with treatment and prevention. But what's really pushing this forward right now is, and we could spend a whole session just talking about big business. That's what's really pushing it forward. It's big money. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is feeling its oats right now and seeing huge potential in all kinds of markets, including beverages, edibles, and mixing in medical and getting high all together in a way that's really, really concerning. So, that's the thing. I mean, prevention works, and if we tackle this issue now in the right way, I think we can avoid being in a spot 10 years from now or more, wishing we had done that. So I think that's my wrap up.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Patrick Crouse for coming here. Once again, Patrick Crouse, Four Rivers Alliance of Hamilton County Coalition Coordinator. And like I said, I'm really glad we got to sit down and talk about this.
Yeah, Gary, thanks. We've been talking about this for a while, and hopefully we can do this on a regular basis. There's lots of other issues to talk about. We touched on some of them. I'm by no means an expert on opioids or anything else, but I think we can talk about certainly a lot of what's happening here in Hamilton County and the Adirondacks, and I think people would be really interested for us to share some of the stuff that we're involved in, the Alliance and some of the other groups working here in Hamilton County, and hopefully keep this conversation going.
All right. Thank you. And for everyone out there, thank you for listening. Remember, you can always listen to the Heart to Heart with Gary Rhinehart on our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/Dacklin Radio. And of course, you can always tune in here to Dacklin Radio and listen to the wonderful interviews that we do. So until next time, I'm Gary, this is Patrick, and we'll see you next time.